Our next speaker is Mark Browser, President and CEO of Empowering Enterprises. Mark, please come up for your presentation, The Keys to Empowered Leadership.
Well, good afternoon. As you mentioned, my name is Mark Bowser. It's good to be able to be here with you today. The last time I had an opportunity to speak to this group was right before COVID. I didn't do it. Well, today, I want to start out by just asking us a question, actually a few questions. What is it? What is that special ingredient that took 13 fledgling colonies in the 1770s and turned them into the greatest nation in force on earth? Okay? Let me ask this. About 100 years past that, what was that special sauce that took a country that had been split apart through a terrible civil war and brought back together? What is that something that took ideas and turned them into some of the greatest companies that the earth has ever seen? Carnegie Steel, Microsoft, Southwest Airlines, Ford Motor Company, SpaceX, just to name a few. And what is that thing, that secret something that can take your business and your association to new heights that can't even be imagined today? Well, I called it secret. I called it special sauce. I called it a something. But the truth of the matter is, it's none of those things. It's not secret, even though unfortunately it is rare today. It's not some special sauce. It is something that's available to everybody. And that simple something is leadership. Extraordinary leadership. And so what can we do in order to become those type of leaders that can take us to wherever we are today to wherever we want to be? Today's presentation is based on my book called Thrown In. And I want you to think about those terms, thrown in. Because sometimes what happens is this. We feel like we are thrown into a situation or because of circumstance that we have to be a leader. But how many of us sometimes feel ill-equipped for those type of circumstances or those type of situations? Well, I have good news for you. And the good news is simply this. There are no such things as born leaders. You will never go to a newspaper or an online directory and you will never see, today a leader was born to Grant and Susie Smith. But if you go to the obituary page, and if you guys are like my dad, you go to those a lot. My dad would look at the obituary page a lot because obviously that was part of our livelihood. But if you go there, you will see something like this. On Tuesday, the CEO, the leader of XYZ Corporation, passed away. So if leaders are not born, but leaders do die, that means somewhere between birth and death, people became extraordinary leaders, which means it can be learned. Danny Cox said, there is no saturation to education. There is no saturation to education. And so today, what we're going to do is we're going to go through kind of a smorgasbord, kind of a cafeteria line of principles, of skills and ideas, that if you begin to take hold of these ideas, if you're a great leader today, you can be an extraordinary leader tomorrow. If you're a good leader today, you can be a great leader tomorrow. And if you're just starting out, that's fine too, because you can be that extraordinary leader of a week from today. Okay? Now, just like any cafeteria line, you may not like everything on the cafeteria line. And you may not be able to choose everything on the cafeteria line. That's okay. But choose something today. And choose to take action on it, because it will make an impact. John Maxwell said, everything rises and falls on leadership. He's right. Everything rises on us, whether we develop our leadership or whether we don't develop our leadership. But have you ever heard this saying? It's an old saying that if you keep doing the same things over and over, you're going to keep getting the same results. And so something has to change. Brian Tracy loved to tell the story about Albert Einstein. In 1942, Dr. Einstein was teaching a physics class at Oxford University. And he had just administered an exam to the seniors in that class. And he and his little teaching assistant were walking back across the campus. And the little TA was a little confused. He goes, you know, Dr. Einstein, that exam that you just gave the senior class, isn't that the same exam you gave them last year as juniors? And Dr. Einstein goes, yeah, same exam. Well, Dr. Einstein, how can you give the exact same exam to the same class 2 years in a row? Oh, that's easy. The answers have changed. Now, we may not totally understand from a physics standpoint what Dr. Einstein was talking about, that the answers have changed. He kind of thought on a different plane than most of us. But his point is definitely applicable for our leadership journey today. If you're going to get something different, the answers have to change. If you want to take your team from where they are to where you want them to be, the answers have to change. If you want to take this association to where it is today to where it will be tomorrow, the answers have to change. And if the answers have to change, the questions have to change. If we keep asking ourselves and our team members the same questions, we're going to keep getting the exact same answers. As we go through the next few moments, and we share some ideas and some illustrations, some questions are going to come into your mind. Some ideas are going to come to your mind. Jot those down. Explore those in depth in the next few days, because the answers will change. And if the answers will change, everything changes. So how do we do this? Well, again, get ready to grab your fork and your knife. We're going to go through that cafeteria line of leadership ideas. So, you ready? All right, step number one. Step number one is, what is leadership? I think we have to start there. What is leadership? Bruce Larson wrote a book. I love the title of it. And it's, where are you going to be when you get where you're going? It's a good question. Where are you going to be when you get where you're going? And so in order for us to know where we're going to be from a leadership perspective, we have to understand what leadership is. So what is leadership? The best definition I have ever heard comes from a guy by the name of J. Oswald Sanders. And he defined leadership years ago with one word: influence. Influence. Nothing more, nothing less. And the truth of the matter is, we influence a handful of people every single day. It might be as simple as influencing someone in here on where to go get coffee tonight. Or it might be as important to influence your teenage daughter or granddaughter not to get on drugs. But we influence a handful of people every single day. And so literally our goal today is to give you skills, to give you principles that can improve your influence, that can grow your influence. Number two. Second thing is great leaders have integrity. Let me ask you a question. It's kind of a controversial question. I live in the Cincinnati area today, and when Marge Schott used to own the Cincinnati Reds, it was a question that got her in all kinds of trouble. But I'm going to risk it here today, because I have a big point for it. She didn't explain it very well. Was Hitler a good leader? Based on our definition that leadership is influence, was Hitler a great leader? Yeah, unfortunately he was. He was. He influenced a lot of people, and 11 million people died in those concentration camps. And that's a conservative number. So, okay, now it seems like our definition just kind of ran aground. After the success of the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, one of John Maxwell's friends came up to him. He said, you know, John, if a bad person followed the 21 laws, would they be effective? And John thought about it for a moment. He goes, uh-oh, I got a problem. You see, Hitler was effective, but he was a rotten leader. He was evil. And that's why John wrote the second book, 21 Indispensable Qualities of a Leader. You see, having influence can be done by a manipulator, a con person. It has to go beyond that. So what is integrity? Well, a number of years ago, a motivational speaker traveled around the country defining integrity as wholeness. And his view was, as long as you are whole to your values, then you have integrity. So what if we have the values that it's all right to lie and cheat and steal? Then do we have integrity? That's where his definition doesn't work. But if you look at the dictionary of what integrity is, it defines exactly what it is. It talks about to be wholeness, congruency, to uprightness, truthfulness, honesty. That's integrity. And so leadership is influence. And great leaders have character, integrity, to where they do the best they can, to be as upright as they can, to lead that team as a good example. So Hitler was effective, but he wasn't a good leader. Number 3, positional leadership versus influential leadership. This is where our culture has a breakdown a little bit, because our culture has a tendency to be so much about positional leadership. I am the CEO. I am the president. I am the emperor of the world. Well, bully for you. But that doesn't mean you're the most influential person in that organization. Have you ever noticed that sometimes the most influential person is the person at the bottom of the totem pole list? The bottom rung on the ladder? But everybody goes to that individual to pick their brain. Hey, what do you think about XYZ? What do you think about that policy? Because that person's the real leader in the organization. That's the person who has the true influence. And it's not a position. So if you have the position, great. Great. But it's more important to have the influence, because the influence is what takes us to the next level. And the influence is what has that staying power. Next principle. Simply what I call graceful leadership. So what is graceful leadership? Well, one day, Walt Disney was coming out of the Disney Animation Building into the hot California sunshine. And as was his habit, and as was the culture in those days, he pulled out his cigarette and he pulled out his lighter. And he tried to light his cigarette, but his lighter was defective. Well, seeing his boss's predicament, Ken Anderson, who was one of their great story guys, Ken Anderson came to his boss's rescue. Now, his lighter got a little too ambitious and not only lit the cigarette, but also lit Walt's mustache. Well, they finally got Walt put out a fire, and Ken knew his days at the Disney organization were numbered. He knew that Walt was going to fire him. They knew that Walt could be a perfectionist. They knew that Walt loved him, but that he could be hard at times. And so, as you can imagine, Ken did not get a very good night's sleep. Well, the next day, about noon, his nightmares came true when he was summoned to Walt's office. And he thought, okay, here it goes. Well, as soon as he got to Walt's office, Walt was ready. He said, come on, Ken, let's go get something to eat. And he then led Ken down to the Disney cafeteria to where they sat at a table and broke bread together. That's graceful leadership. You see, by that time, everybody had heard of Ken's predicament. Everybody, just like the grapevine in our offices, it spreads like wildfire. And everybody had heard what had happened and what Ken had done to Walt's mustache. Now let's think about what Walt did. It would have been great if Walt would have taken him out to lunch somewhere in the city somewhere. That would have been wonderful. That would have shown a lot of grace. But you see what Walt did? He not only showed the grace, he understood that not his, but actually Ken's credibility was shot at the organization. He understood the grapevine. And so breaking bread, having lunch with him in front of everybody else spoke volumes to that entire organization. That's graceful leadership. Disney would do good today to look backward and find out what Walt and Roy did and start leading today. Because they've kind of lost their way of what great leadership is. Graceful leadership. Next principle is people have to want to change. Several years ago, actually a few decades ago, when I was just starting out as a speaker, I was at a conference that Dr. Mike Murdock was speaking at. And I had an opportunity to talk with him before his presentation, get to know him a little bit. He got to know me and what I do and so forth. And during his presentation, he singled me out in front of all these people. Obviously got my attention. And he said, Mark, the people you teach, you can't change anyone unless they want to be changed. That wasn't something I wanted to hear because I thought I could just change the whole world. That was my mission. But being older and wiser, he knew I needed to hear that and to have that reality check. And that's a reality check for leaders as well. Because you see, we can't change anyone on our team if they don't want to change. You cannot change anyone who doesn't want to change. And that is tougher today than it has ever been. As was mentioned, my family owned, actually it was the Bright Corporation. We sold it in 21. And so my father and my uncle and my grandfather, they led that organization for decades, 70 plus years. Well, after we sold that, my younger cousin and I, long story short, we bought one of the businesses we own is a UPS store in Indiana. And so we've owned that for 2+ years. I have fired more people today in 2 years than my dad did in 50. Now, his and my values are pretty much the same. People have, culture has changed. Let me put it that way. Culture has changed, and people will not change unless they want to change. Now, I don't fire anybody. By the time it gets to that, they've fired themselves. Because we've given them so many chances over and over again. I'm not into firing people. I'm into building people. But if somebody chooses not to build, you've got to get the right people on the bus. And that's the whole key. You've got to get the right people on the bus. People change only when they want to. That's probably the hardest lesson we'll all have today. Next one. Leaders set an example they want followed. People watch us. A few years ago, my cousin went with me on a speaking engagement I was doing. And so he's kind of learned my MO at this point and so forth, is I'm pretty much will disappear before and after I speak. Now, not that I won't greet people. I'll be here as long as you want me to be here. My point is this. I learned early on that I was on display. You ever been on display? It's kind of an awkward feeling, isn't it? Particularly as you're eating something like spaghetti. And what happened, and people don't mean to, but you become on display. So I kind of hide out. Now, from a leadership perspective, in your organization, from day in to day out, you are on display. It can be exhausting. But realize we set an example with them, and they are watching us all the time. All the time. So it is good to have some time where you can be with your inner circle and just let your hair down, if you will. But you have to realize that people watch us all the time, which is not a bad thing because we can influence through that. In the 1950s, scientists studied a particular Japanese monkey. And in 1952, they decided to change the game a little bit. And these different monkeys were on different nearby islands. And what they did is they began to drop sweet potatoes into the sand. They were curious to see what these monkeys would do with the sweet potatoes. Well, as you can imagine, once the monkeys got the taste of the sweet potatoes, they absolutely loved them. But they weren't too fond of the sand all over their food. So the scientists just kept observing, and then one day, an 18-month-old monkey that they had affectionately named Emo decided to change the game a little bit. And she gathered up some of her sweet potatoes and took them to a nearby stream and began washing her food. And she began to eat them. Well, Emo loved the now clean taste of the sweet potatoes. Shortly thereafter that, Emo started teaching her mother and the other nearby monkeys about her same age to do the same thing. And so now you had a whole pocket of monkeys washing their food before they ate them. And then just like a tipping point, not too long, on that island, almost all the monkeys started washing their sweet potatoes. And then an amazing thing happened. On the other nearby islands, monkeys also started washing their sweet potatoes. Now, it wasn't like Emo swam across and started giving seminars on how to clean their food. And so we may not always understand exactly how that happened, but it appears that ideas has energy, that ideas have like radio waves. Have you ever been thinking about a friend and then all of a sudden they call you on the phone? Have you ever been discussing an idea and somebody out of the blue comes up and asks the same question that was asked 10 minutes ago of the other person? It's kind of freaky, but it does happen. We know that some products go viral. But why? I don't want to get into the why of it, but from a leadership perspective, think about the influence there. If we can get everybody in our organization to model what we want them to model, think about that if that hits a tipping point with your entire team. When something like that hits a tipping point, teams take off. They go from 0 miles per hour to 150 miles per hour quickly. Because you not only got the right people on the bus, now you've got the right people on the bus all pushing the bus forward in the right direction. That's amazing. So if a monkey, an 18-month-old monkey named Emo, can change an entire culture of monkeys, why can't we change people? Now, we can't change them if they don't want to change. I'm talking about the people who do want to change but need direction. That we can do. Next principle. Sometimes things go awry, don't they? Sometimes things don't go the way we want. And sometimes leaders have to be that extra ingredient of success for our team. In other words, we have to motivate them. In 1988, Lou Holtz was the coach of the Notre Dame Fighting Irish football team. And they were undefeated at that time. Their very next game was against the also undefeated Miami Hurricanes. These two schools were considered the two top football teams in the country that year. And people thought that they would be battling it out for the national championship. Well, the day before the big game, which was going to be held in South Bend, Indiana, on Notre Dame's campus, they held a huge rally, a huge pep rally. Like 20,000 people showed up for this pep rally. And, you know, it was a lot of the rah-rah, singing the school song and so forth. And at the very last, Coach Holtz stood up to speak. And he didn't speak very long. But he ended his remarks like this: "You go find and you go tell Jimmy Johnson," who was the coach of the Hurricanes at that time, "you go tell Jimmy Johnson we're going to beat the dog out of Miami." Now, the Notre Dame football team just sat there, didn't say a word. In fact, they had been sitting that way the entire pep rally, which had not gone unnoticed to Coach Holtz. After the rally, they were going to meet across campus, the team was, and have their chalk talk. Now, a chalk talk was, they didn't have the smart boards that we have today and things like that. They had a piece of chalk and a blackboard. And the chalk talk would be something that Lou Holtz would actually write down the game plan or whatever it is that they were wanting to do for the next game. And so as soon as the team gathered for the chalk talk, Lou Holtz, he grabbed his piece of chalk and he wrote on the board, "We're going to beat the dog out of Miami." Then he looked at his team and he said, "Why did I say that?" Crickets. Nobody said anything. Finally, a hand sheepishly went up, and one of the players said, because our defensive line gets off quicker. So Coach Holtz wrote, "Okay, defensive line off quicker. Anything else?" Our special teams are better. Special teams are better. And that continued on, and they little by little started giving the things, and he would just keep writing down each answer that they had. And they began to get a little bit more motivated about it. And then Coach Holtz, he looked at him, he said, "All right, who's going to get an interception for Notre Dame tomorrow?" Number of hands went up. "Who's going to get a touchdown for Notre Dame tomorrow?" Number of hands went up. And that continued on for a while. And what was the result of that little tiny little secret ingredient called motivation? They won 31-30. 31-30 the next day. When in the previous 4 games against the Hurricanes, if you combine the score that the Hurricanes had and the score that the Irish had, in the 4 games before that they had played head-to-head, Miami had won 133-20. So you can see why the team was down. But that little extra motivation took them over the top. And guess what happened at the end of the 1988 season? Notre Dame was national champions. See, sometimes it takes that little bit of extra, that tiny little bit, that little bit of enthusiasm that can take your team to the next level. And it's amazing if you're playing at your best ability or doing your best at whatever your task may be, you add enthusiasm on top of it, it will get better. And that's what Coach Holtz did. And sometimes that's our job, because sometimes things don't go the way you want. And sometimes teams get down on the dumps, and sometimes it's our job to pull them up. In my own life, I was a tennis player until I blew out my shoulder and blew out my knees and everything else. And I played high school tennis, college tennis, played a couple semi-pro tournaments. And I remember I was just coming off one of my shoulder surgeries, and I was playing a practice match with my coach, who was a great player. And he had just clobbered me, just blew me off the court. And I had a tournament I was playing the next day. And I remember sitting at the side of the court with him. He didn't yell at me. He didn't say anything negative. He just sat there with me. Because I think he understood I just had a rotten day. And I think he understood that if he ripped on everything I did wrong that day, it would make it worse. But he knew, and by him not ripping into me, told me he knew that if I started playing better, I could end and win that tournament. I ended up winning that tournament. What would have happened if Coach Scott would have ripped into me that day and told me everything I did wrong? I wouldn't have won that tournament, I guarantee you that. But his belief in me gave me belief that I didn't have in myself at that time. That's our job. That's our job as leaders. Help them believe when they can't. Help them to believe when they're down. And that pulls them up. Leaders seek the answers they need. That's our next principle. Leaders seek the answers they need. So, what does that mean? Well, we talked about early on that the answers have to change in order for things to change. One of my colleagues in the speaking industry is Danny Cox. Now, before Danny was a speaker, he was known as the sonic boom salesman in the Air Force. He was a fighter pilot. And he flew a big fighter, a very heavy fighter. He had 2,400 hours in that high-performance fighter jet. Air show pilot, no accidents. Now, Why was he called the sonic boom salesman? Well, because his job was to go around to the communities where those bases were and to explain to that community that those sonic booms were good for them. You think you've ever sold something tough? Try selling one of those. I mean, when you're breaking windows and rattling windows and driving people nuts in the neighborhood and scaring dogs, and he's saying, this is good for you, folks. Well, he got pretty good at that. Well, finally he decided to retire from the Air Force, and then he decided that he was going to go fly for the airlines. He figured, I'm the hottest thing in the sky. The airlines are going to love having me. 2,400 hours, no accidents, fighter jet pilot, air show pilot. But he realized after a couple interviews that he had a problem with the airlines. And so as he said, when they were talking to me on the phone, they loved me. But as he's talking on the phone with one, as he realized he had this problem, he said, no, wait a minute here. Before I mail in my application, and before I waste a stamp, let me ask you a question. What's the height requirement for your airline? They go, well, 5'8". He goes, well, what a coincidence. That just so happens to be my goal. Obviously, a little shorter than 5'8". And so he couldn't fly for the airlines. Think about that. One of the best pilots in the world can't fly for the airlines because he's too short. Who would you rather be flying, you and your family, to Disney World? Do you want a 6'5" pilot who has about 10 hours of training? Or would you rather have Danny Cox, who's a little bit shorter than that, who has 2,400 hours training? Well, he found out it is what it is. You can't change people who don't want to be changed, and the airline didn't want to be changed. None of them did. So he decided, if I can sell a sonic boom, I can sell anything. Wrong. But he decided to become a sales professional. So he joined this big sales company, and he was put on one of their teams. They had 36 different offices spread out in the region, and he was put on one of those teams. And he sold for a year, kind of did okay. After a year, his boss came to him and said, Danny, we would now like to promote you. You got a year of sales under your belt. You have all this experience in the Air Force. We'd like to make you a leader in one of our offices. And so they put him as a leader in the top office out of that 36. So, great office. In 3 months' time span, he took that number one office from number one position to number 36. Totally wiped them out. He hadn't come to one of my seminars yet. Now, after 3 months, his boss comes to him with curt little lips, and he said, Danny, I just wanted to let you know I am looking for your replacement. And Danny looked at him and he said, that is the shortest but most powerful motivational speech I have ever heard. I'm going to have to learn to do this thing. And his boss goes, my boy, you ain't got much time. And so Danny's thinking, okay, what can I do? I can't go to college. I can't get an MBA. I don't have time for that. They're going to fire me. And so he figured the best thing to do is I got to talk to people. So what he realized was in magazines and newspapers back in those days, today on the internet, you see stories written about these great leaders. You know what Danny did? He called him up on the phone. He said, hi, my name is Danny Cox. You don't know me, but I took the number one office out of 36 down to 36 in 3 months' time frame. I need to have lunch with you. And they go, you did what? We better have lunch, and we better have it soon. He never got turned down, which kills the myth that successful people aren't willing to share why they're successful. Of course they are. Most of them will. Only the arrogants won't. And so Danny started having lunch with these great leaders, and he just wrote down what they did. And then he went back to his office, and he did what he wrote down. And guess what happened? 4 months later, they were right back up to number one. You see, Danny had fallen into the little myth as well, that he figured, before he learned all that, he figured that if he took all of his team members and made little Danny Coxes out of them, molded them like clay into people just like himself, isn't that what the company wanted? I mean, they promoted him, so they must like what he does. But the reality is, Danny said, really, you want to know how I really did that? He said, if I could make them do things the way I did things when I had their job, they would never come to me with a problem that I didn't have the answer for already. He was afraid. You see, our job is not to make little us's out of our team members. Our job is to help them to be the best that they can be. And how did they do that? Have you ever noticed that when somebody is super successful, like Danny became, that people always have an excuse? Well, you must have had the cream of the crop people. You must have gotten all the best people in that entire region. Danny goes, nope, just worked with what I had. But he didn't compare them to each other. He didn't take little Johnny, who may be the worst salesperson he had, and compare him with Susie, who may be the best. He looked to Johnny and said, okay, Johnny, you had 2 sales last month. Let's see how we can help you get 3. And he goes to Susie, Susie, you had 25 sales last month. Let's see how you can get 30. He said, I just helped them be the best that they could be. I helped them set their own records. And he said, we broke individual records. We broke team records. We broke company records. And we broke industry records by just helping each individual be the best them that they could be. That's powerful. That's leadership. That's why it's rare today, because we don't have people doing that. He just helped each person be the best that they could be after he learned the answers by asking the questions to the right people. Now, last lesson in this little one with Danny Cox. Notice who he asked. He asked the best of the best. If you go to a leader and ask them how they did what they did, and they're a rotten leader, guess what you're going to get? Rotten solutions, which won't work. And so what he did is he found the best of the best and asked them. That's leadership. That's how we find the correct answers. Who's the best and the best in your industry? Who are they? You probably know them on top of your tip of your mind, tip of your thoughts. Who are they? Jot them down. Call them. Take them to lunch. Maybe the best lunch you'll ever have. It works. It's worked in my career. I've had the opportunity over the decades to hang out with and learn from some of the top sales gurus and trainers and sales professionals in the world. And you know what? It rubs off. When you pick their brains and you dig into what they've done and you just go home and do the same stuff, guess what? You get similar, if not identical, results. It works. And it's a simple way to get to success. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to think about the answers yourself. Ask the people who are already there. Next principle. Leaders aren't afraid to get their hands dirty. Have you ever worked for somebody who didn't believe that? They always gave the rotten jobs to everybody else. You go clean the bathrooms today. Again? Years ago, early in my career, I worked on the production staff of Peterloh International. Peterloh is the guy who put on, back in the mid-90s, what was called the Success Seminars. And they're largest business seminars in the world. Zig Ziglar spoke on all of them. Tom Hopkins spoke on most of them. Former president spoke on most of those. And we had, by the way, my little staff badge didn't mean diddly to the Secret Service. When President Bush Sr. would speak on those, by the way, I got about as close to him as I could have without being tackled. But my little staff badge didn't mean diddly to those folks. And those were interesting days. But one day, I remember we were in Denver, and very, very hectic seminar. One of the things I did was I worked on and led one of the production teams in terms of the product sales. And so in those big arenas, we would have product tables, kind of like this, set up around in different parts of the arena. And so I'd lead one of those teams. And I remember at one point in the seminar, we had a lot of customers. In fact, I had too many customers, which is a good problem to have, but it's still too many people. And the number 2 guy at Peterloh came up to me and said, Mark, how can I help? And I just said, I need people. Well, I didn't realize that probably the other teams had the same problem I was having. There weren't any more people that they could transfer to my location. And so you know what he did? He jumped behind the table and he started serving customers himself. Spoke volumes to me. It told me that he wasn't going to ask me to do anything he wasn't willing to do himself. And when you see them roll up their sleeves and actually get behind and start getting their fingers dirty, that lets you realize, hey, I don't mind getting my fingers dirty because I've seen them do it before. I bet they just need me to do it today. That makes a huge impact. Roll up your sleeves. Get your hands dirty. Next principle. Adversity can help you win. How many of you like adversity? Nobody. How about pain? Anybody like pain? Nobody likes pain either? I don't either. But, have you ever heard of growing pains? Would any of us be the height we are today if we didn't have growing pains when we were a kid? Probably not. Probably not. Did you realize that growing pains are there all the time? We never outgrow them. And so, what can we learn from that? Well, a book I'd highly recommend is Make Your Bed by Admiral McRaven. If you've never read that, go get that book tonight. Great, great leader himself. Now, in that, he talks about being on the circus list. Now, Admiral McRaven was a SEAL, and he led the SEALs for many, many years as well. Now, in SEAL training, if you were put on the circus list, that meant that something did not go well for you that day in training. You did something wrong or something that the trainers didn't particularly like that you did. And so the circus list, if you were on that, you were granted with an award of 2 extra hours of calisthenics at the end of the day. And so the days are hard anyway. Now you have 2 more hours on top of it. And he said by the time you rolled into your bunk, I mean, you were just exhausted. And you were practically asleep by the time your head hit the pillow. Now, because you're so exhausted, what are the chances of you being put on the circus list the very next day? Pretty good. And if you've had 2 or 3 circuses in a row, they just keep piling up on you because you don't ever seem to get your head above the water. But then he said the day dawns on you where you're getting stronger. These extra 2 hours every day of calisthenics have made your muscles stronger. You're faster, you're stronger, you're better than the other recruits. Not because you're better talent necessarily, but you had more training, physical training. Adversity can help us. It's not fun. Adversity and pain like that is never fun, but it does make you stronger. The next principle is similar to what Coach Holtz did, is great leaders inspire hope. And this is also a story from the Admiral. At the very end of SEAL training, they go through what's called Hell Week. Now, one of the most awful parts of that week is you had to spend an entire night up to your neck into the mud flats. And so you got cold, bitterly cold mud covering everything except your head. And you had to stay there all night as it got dark and it got cold and it got colder and colder. And if that wasn't bad enough, the instructors, who were all Vietnam vets, would sit there and just taunt you to death. You know, if just one of you quits, if one of you will be a loser that you already are, then everybody else can get out of the mud. And how many people started to think, I got to get out of this mud, I don't care what they call me. But then finally, Admiral McRaven said that one off-key voice started to sing in the mud. And that one voice became 2 voices. It became 3 voices. And pretty soon, all the SEAL recruits were singing in the mud. Of course, the instructors taunted them more and said, "Stop it! If you don't stop, you're going to have something worse than the mud." But they just kept singing. And he said, all of a sudden, the mud didn't seem so cold and the dawn didn't seem so far away. If one shaky, off-key voice can inspire hope in probably one of the worst conditions we could even think of, think about what a kind word from us can do to lift somebody up, to let them know that they're doing a good job. A couple weeks ago, I took out one of our young sales associates out on a marketing little tour with me in the Indianapolis area. And what we were doing was we were basically setting up some joint ventures. And so what I did was I took him out, he would be there with me, and he'd watch me go through a few. And then we were sitting in my van, and I go, "You ready to take on the next one?" He goes, "Can I see one more?" So, okay, sure. So we went into their place, and I gave him the idea and the spiel, the whole thing it was. And then I told him, our kid's name's Lemire, and I told Lemire, I said, "All right, Lemire, you ready?" He goes, "Okay, okay." I said, "Do you want to go in by yourself, or do you want me to be in there with you?" "I want you to come with me." So I came in with him, and he was about right here, and I just stood behind. I said nothing. I just stood back here. And he went in, shakily a little bit, but gave the marketing idea, concept to them to see if they wanted to be a joint venture partner with us, and then we came out. And you should have seen him. I mean, he had accomplished something that he had never done before. He could have flown all the way back. We could have put the van on his shoulders and flew us back. That makes a difference. Just a little bit of hope. Just a tiny little bit of hope, and it makes a difference. A big, big difference. Well, we've got just a few moments left, but let me cover a couple more ideas. 4 laws of success. Now, is a law unbreakable? It's supposed to be. Doesn't always seem that in our culture today, does it? Criminals are getting off scot-free for anything. Now, I'm not talking about cultural laws. The 4 laws of success I'm talking about are not cultural laws, but are natural laws. Okay? Now, let me ask you a question. Is a natural law like the law of gravity optional? Let's say you're cleaning the gutters on your roof. So, you just cleaned all the gutters and you decide, I am tired of that stinking ladder. I'm not going to use the ladder on the way down, and I'm just going to float on down. Now, does the law of gravity care if you believe about it or not? No, doesn't hurt its feelings. You step off that roof and not on that ladder, you're going to be a believer in the law of gravity real soon, too. You see, natural laws don't care. And natural laws are unbreakable, and natural laws are unbendable. Natural laws work the exact same way all the time. And so natural laws are both natural and psychological in many cases. So the ones we're going to talk about today are a little bit more of the psychological ones. First law is the law of cause and effect. This is the big one. The law of cause and effect. Now, that law says that for every cause, if you track up all those causes, it equals an effect. For every effect, every action, every result does have a result that you can track back. In other words, you can reverse engineer it. That's kind of like what Danny Cox did. He reverse engineered what those other leaders were doing. This is the most fabulous law of success because you can track everything back. What was the first thing they did? What did they do after that? What was the third step they took? And if you take the same steps that they take or took, you'll get the same results. We have a guy that's going to be coming up to the Indianapolis area, which is where a UPS store that we own is, and he's from Tennessee. We have one, my cousin and I have we're blessed with one of the top grossing stores in the state of Indiana. We're a platinum store. And that sounds all great, and it is. However, there's a store in Tennessee that's really kicking butt. This owner is willing to come up to us, and not just us, but the other owners in the area, and share with us his steps, if you will. Not his secret sauce, just his steps that he's doing with his team. Now, why would he do that? Well, one, we're outside his territory, so there's no threat to him. We're not sitting right next to him. Next thing is, just like we talked about earlier, successful people are more than willing to sit down and share their ideas in most cases. And that's what he's going to do. Now, it's a win-win. Guess what we're going to do? We're going to pay him. We're going to pay him to come up and share these ideas. So he has the burden of driving all the way up and coming up to Indianapolis. We're going to pay him to do that for us. It makes a huge impact. Law of cause and effect. Next law, the law of belief. Now, basically this law says that whatever you believe with feeling, and that's the key, whatever you believe with feeling will become your reality. Whatever you believe with feeling will become your reality. Now, what if what you believe is not true? What do you think? If you believe something that's not true, but you believe it fervently with feeling, what will that do? You'll go in that direction. That's why this one is a pivotal one, because it's a challenging one. Think about Jim Jones. Jim Jones believed fervently in his, whatever you would call it. He became a cult leader. And because of his belief with feeling, he killed over 900 people, 909 people. Over 300 of them were children by drinking that Kool-Aid that was laced with poison. See, that's why the law of belief is so powerful and why it can also mess people up. Because it's not about my truth and your truth, it's about truth. Truth is truth. Winston Churchill said that, and he said, truth is incontrovertible. Panic may resent it, ignorance may deride it, malice may distort it, but there it is. Truth is truth. Now, if we believe truth with feeling, that makes all the difference in the world. The Bible says that the truth will set you free. Now, for me personally, that's where my truth is with the Word of God. That pulls me towards the true path. That pulls me toward, I'm a Christian, which means I believe in Jesus Christ as the Lord and Savior of my life. Now, does that mean I'm perfect? No. But what does it do? When I go off path, it pulls me back. That's what truth does. So, what do you believe? It is very important to spend some time exploring what you believe. And believe that with feeling. Third law. Third law is the law of expectation. Now, this is similar to the law of belief. In this case, it says, the law of expectation says that what you expect to happen with confidence becomes your reality as well. Now, have you ever met somebody who always looked on the negative side? They expected the worst all the time. I'm just sure it's going to rain today. And so they always have an umbrella with them. I'm just being prepared. Boy Scout motto, you know. No, you're being negative. But if you expect to win, you will win. A number of years ago, one of my practice partners in tennis had never beaten me. And he had a tendency to have a little bit of a negative attitude, to get down on himself. And we were playing a practice match, and he was way up in a set, way up. Next thing we knew, I'd won the set. And we were at the corner at the changeover, and he said, I don't get it. I was way up on you. I was up like 5-1 or something. Like, how did you do that? And I just said, well, I told myself to play better. He goes, what do you mean you told yourself to play better? That makes no sense. And I said, well, I expected to win. I didn't tell him this, but I said, you had never beaten me in your life, and that wasn't going to start today. I expected to win. And it pulled me to match that level of, in that case, tennis ability, tennis playing. It works. Now, think about the gift it could be if we can help our team members expect to win. Like Galen Scott, my coach, did for me that day after I had a bad day at the side of the court, and he just helped me work through it, and I ended up winning the tournament. It's amazing. Expect to win. Last law, the law of as if. The law of as if. Now, it's more known in our culture today as fake it till you make it. But it's based on psychological reality and truth. Dr. William James, many, many decades ago, discovered the as-if formula. That's what he called it. Dr. James was the father of American psychology. And what they found out is our attitude, our states of mind, our mood are controlled by two things. One, our internal representations, which basically means the pictures of how the world is and our place in it that we see in our mind. And 2, our action steps, our physical body. Now, they found out those are on what's connected together through what's called a cybernetic loop, which means if you change one, you change the other. They found the quickest way to change your mood or your attitude is actually on how you move your body. That's where Dr. James's as-if formula came in. He said, act the way you want to be. If you're down today, put a smile on your face. Now, does that work? Did you realize that it takes 18 muscles to form a smile? These 18 muscles actually release a chemical in our brain that makes us feel good. The as-if principle does work, to act as if. So if you want to be a certain way, how would you act if you were that way already? As corny as it sounds, it works. Doesn't work overnight, doesn't work in 5 minutes, but it will work if you stay consistent with it. Follow those 4 laws, and it will make a significant impact in your life as well as your team member's life. Now, last thing I want to mention. Let's fast forward a couple months. You've put some of these things in action, and you've been consistent with it. But your team is not moving quite as quickly or moving at all like you want them to. So what's going on? Well, sometimes what happens is growth is under the surface. Sometimes the baggage of the present takes some time for the future to overwhelm it. The baggage of the past sometimes is even more powerful. But if you keep working it, they will take hold. The growth is there. It's just still under the surface until it pops up. If you stop watering, guess what happens? It withers and dies. If you put a cloud of negativity over it, it's like putting a cloud over the sunshine. You have to keep watering the seeds that you've planted, and they will grow. Trust me on that one. They will grow. And in time, this organization and your individual businesses will be taking the lead, and others will be looking at you guys, and you'll be sharing the steps you took. Thanks for having me today. God bless you.